Welcome to Undertalk with Toaster and Jay. We're going to talk about cool stuff from the late 80s and also from the 90s. My name is Jay Muller, and here is Olaf Toast.
Hello and welcome to the Undertalk, the podcast of the anderen. And hello, Jay. How's the weather in the Philippines?
Hello. We had some great weather, really windy and earthquakey and all sorts of cool things. We're okay, but not everybody's okay here, but don't ask me about the weather.
You know, we have climate change here in Germany. It hit us worse. I mean, when I look out of the window, it's sunny. It's 14 degrees on the Celsius scale, so it's quite convenient. It's almost like a weather for short trousers, short pants, and quite unusual for November, but I like it. I hate snow. I hate cold. So let's play one of our very early recordings, recorded by Paul Landers, the now guitarist of Rammstein, and it's called Rote Haare, and it's, of course, a love song.
Cool. Here it is.
Wunderbar, dein rotes Haar. 1000 Gründe sagen ja. Wunderschön, dich anzusehen. Keine Kraft vorbeizugehen. Ha!
I'm in a good mood, I'm in good spirits, and let's talk about some not so good aspects of our career in the 1980s. Well, or kind of ambivalent aspects. The collaboration with the state or the government of the GDR in terms of getting licenses and getting along with the authorities and even making radio recordings, because the radio was maybe even bigger music producer than the only record company, Amiga.
Okay, let's talk about that. You said not so good, but I can't remember anything very bad compared to now, but go ahead.
I think it's ambivalent, if that's the right word. It wasn't only good and not only bad, but of course we had to do compromises in some way. But I was young and I was used to that, didn't know any other society, so I didn't worry about that too much. First, of course, if you wanted to perform in the youth clubs, on stages, in pubs and city halls or wherever, you had to get performing license. That was kind of weird because you had to perform in front of the jury. You had to fake that you had at least 25 songs, and most of them should be your own songs or songs from GDR artists or other East Bloc artists to adhere to the quota, which was 60-40, 60% East German, East Bloc, and only 40% cover versions from Western countries. But actually, it wasn't that hard to get a license. We just faked the song list and then we got it and we were ready, allowed to perform for money, which was the main point, for money. And the structure, the cultural system of the GDR wasn't all that bad because it guaranteed you a certain income. There was a scheme actually for all the contracts. And in comparison to today, where a lot of musicians actually perform for free or pay to play, you could make some decent money in a GDR by playing in a band.
They actually told us what we're allowed to ask, right? Depending on how the licensing thing went, the Einstufung, I think it was called. Depending on how that went, they told you how much you can ask for your concert per person, right?
Right. There were categories like Unterstufe, Mittelstufe, Oberstufe, Sonderstufe, and then there was some premium on the Sonderstufe. Basically, Sonderstufe, which we got in June 1986, in combination with some tricks on the contract, would get you 100 marks a gig, which accumulated to 800 marks a month because there was live music was in high demand. So we could play 8 gigs a month. Wasn't a rarity. So 800 marks were quite enough to lead a decent life in a GDR because my rent was just 25 marks a month.
Well, because 800 marks, if I remember, was pretty much like the salary of some sort of average job, wasn't it?
Yeah, I used to be an industrial worker before. And when we had good months, like with at least 22 labor days, I would make like 780 or something like that.
Yeah, so you could definitely live like anybody else who had a job. And actually, it was a lot more fun, I can tell you that.
Yes, you didn't have to, getting up early was always something that I didn't like. I remember that I used to get up at 4:45 in the morning when I still lived with my parents and then had travel 3 hours back and forth each day to get to the factory. So, no, you didn't want to go to the factory actually back then. And so you did everything to avoid it. And making music was one way to avoid to go to a factory. There wasn't so much of a topic to discuss because we thought, well, we have to do it, so everybody does it. And then we had, the guys from Feeling B who got their forming license or Einstufung in 1983. And it was a Sonderstufe, the highest possible grade, at the first trial. And we thought, well, if they can do it, we can do it. So that was kind of the initial thing, the Feeling B Einstufung 1983.
I remember I also did, before I came to the Anderen, I was playing in that band Kleinkariert, and we also did Einstufung. I think we got Mittelstufe, if I remember right. And I think we did that in 1984. So it wasn't that hard, if I remember right.
No, it wasn't, and it also didn't require to sign something that you would stand with the government or the Socialist Unity Party.
No, not at all. No.
It was like getting a driving license or something. And actually, the system, in hindsight, wasn't all that bad because it, as I said, it gave you a kind of a structure to earn your money in an orderly fashion. And the other thing is that, what would have been the alternative? The alternative would have been to side with the folks from the church who were actually the only force in East Germany who had property and rooms or even halls and, places where you could perform. But to play in a church isn't that much fun because it sounds terrible. It's also, I wasn't so much in love with the church back then and now. So
Neither was I. I think generally people were not religious in East Germany. Certainly not the younger people.
No, I mean, I've been with folks from the so-called Junge Gemeinde when I was much younger, like 16. And yeah, but there was also something ideological, I remember. And it was interesting, but not something that I wanted to join. But what I certainly wanted to do, and I think you wanted to do that too, is having regular and frequent performances. And we figured that in the mid 80s, the bosses of the youth clubs actually wanted to have an alternative music program. They were happy to invite bands like us because they were kind of fed up with the Poodies, Rockhouse, City, or Carousel, and Lift stuff. They wanted to have something alternative. So, all the signs were set in our favor.
Oh, yeah, I remember I was, in my previous band, Kleinkaret, before the anderen, I was taking over the role of like a manager for a while, which meant mostly to organize gigs. So I called up all the youth clubs and sort of places where bands like us could play. And the response was, I'd say, like 50-50. Either they already had something and there's no space, or yeah, no problem, let's do it. And you never had to negotiate about money because that was all like decided by the license sort of thing you had, the Einstufung. So it was relatively simple and there was a demand.
Yes. As I said before, demand for live music in a GDR, I think, was much higher than it is today. And not only in the youth clubs, but all the many pubs all across the country had kind of a ballroom, and they wanted to have a live band at the weekends. And some of the bands, I knew one band from Berlin who actually had like 20 gigs a month, driving across the country, mostly in Saxony and in Thuringia.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, I don't think they get that now.
No, they don't get it. And, how did it progress from then? The first contact with the radio station was actually made by a friend of mine, Dominik Arndt, who worked as an intern at the GDR radio station. And that wasn't so far away from the place where I used to work back in the days. So, and then we were invited to the radio. I think the host was Hanno Harnisch. And we could play in the garden of the radio station, actually. And Hanno would do an interview with us. And that was all very friendly and nice. And I thought, well, some nice folks here at the radio, we can talk to them. That was the way I did it all the time. I just, tested it once or twice. And if the people were good, I would continue talking to them. Obviously, Amiga and GDR television was a different issue, but radio was always good.
The funny thing is, in hindsight, you can see how good we had it relatively to later times. And we didn't know it. Of course, we kind of appreciated when it was great and things worked out. But we always thought, it's not so great. I always had that sort of in the back of my mind, it's better in the West somehow. But I don't think it was. It was just different.
Well, thank God we had Alyosha from Feeling B, who just told us that all the people who had their Ausreiseantrag and would go from East Berlin to West Berlin, they all gather at the Sozialamt, the welfare authority, in Berlin-Kreuzberg in West Berlin, actually. He said, the action is in the East and not in the West. We were warned not to go there.
Yeah. I remember I asked Alyosha once, you can go to the West always. Why do you always come back? I think it was 1987 or something. And I remember him saying, well, because it is much more cool and much more free in East Germany, which surprised me because I always assumed the other way. But, that was a great perspective from somebody who could actually go, because we couldn't at the time, to the West. But so it was great to hear, and I could appreciate it much more than after hearing that. You're right. Alyosha played a key role in a lot of things back then.
Yes, and the other, at least one more person played a key role, and that was Mikhail Gorbachev. because his perestroika and glasnost policies also opened up the GDR in a way, while, the ruling Politburo didn't want to, accept that kind of policy, but the lower levels, like the cultural hierarchy or, the bosses of the youth clubs, they were inspired by Gorbachev. So our impression was that the situation steadily improves. And there are also people like on the radio stations and the television station or in certain big concert halls, they would make up their minds and were more welcoming to us. That was actually a good time. It was fun to test the boundaries of the state, of the government, because they were nearing to us rather than the other way around. I keep getting letters like from cultural institutions. Oh, Toaster, do you want to come and join the talk? And let's talk about how we can improve. One main advantage that the Anderen had is that our two managers throughout our career, Adam Adamski and Lars Wünsche, both were promoters in certain clubs in East Berlin. So they had good contacts to other promoters and they knew the demand. That was very helpful for us.
Yes.
So the question is, can you be contaminated by talking to authorities, radio station folks, record company folks in the GDR? Well, I don't think so. Just give them a chance and test them once and then see if you can get along with them. Radio guys were actually positive and good to deal with. Record company guys were not. And also, in my view, the record company Amiga didn't make a real interesting offer because their studio was bad. It all sounded dull, what they produced. Then the vinyl was bad. So dynamics on the vinyl records were worse than in West Germany, for instance. So I thought, well, give it a shot. But if it doesn't work, let's keep recording cassette tapes. I wasn't a vinyl guy throughout all my life. I like cassettes much more. So it was easy to decline a deal with a record company because I said, it's not such an interesting offer. Also, the payment was very bad by Amiga back in the days. I think Tony Carlos City once said, the money for the hit Am Fenster was so little that they basically left it in the Amiga canteen.
Well, you know that I actually did make a deal with Amiga, which was right towards the end of the whole system. And I still have that old contract, and I did it as a solo artist after I stopped being the drummer of the Anderen. And they did give me 20,000 East German marks as a sort of down payment. So they give me, 20,000 marks, which I thought, oh, that's quite a lot of money for East Germany, right? You have to work like more than a year for that if you had a normal job. So I was very happy with that. But that was at the very end, and I was some sort of special case. I don't even know why I was a special case. They experimented with me, I always thought. They were trying out new things, which they'd never tried before. So, but I agree with you that it was much better to have cassettes, because number one, you had total control over it. We can do it ourselves. The numbers weren't that high anyway. We could sell it or give it away at concerts, and it was totally controlled by the bands, which was far better than having some sort of, even if it wasn't a state thing, but just some corporation controlling you.
Yes, there is also a technical issue. First, the studio of the record company wasn't well suited for rock and roll recordings. As one technician once told me, they had way too long wires in that huge building that was formerly a cinema and no line drivers. So the signal was already dampened before it reached the mixing desk. That was the first thing. And the other thing was that, at least at the radio, the employees, the technicians, were not employees of the radio station, but of the Deutsche Post. Deutsche Post Studiotechnik, and they had different schedules and different contracts, and they could kind of sabotage a production because they were not even employees of the radio station. So that was kind of a difficult thing. And it was much easier to go, let's say, to Gunter Krex, who was a fellow musician in Prenzlauer Berg who had his own little recording studio in a backyard in Prenzlauer Allee and said, hey, let's do it here. That wasn't as technically advanced as a big studio from the recording company, but it was an intimate atmosphere and good people.
Absolutely. That plays at least as important as some sort of technical advanced situation. You have to feel good because music is obviously, it's the most important thing is the performance. And the quality is almost secondary, I would still say so. I'd rather hear a great performance in a not so great quality than hi-fi, whatever, and the performance sucks.
Right. And that was actually most of the, at least to my ears, most of the kind of official, professional GDR bands sounded kind of dull to me. Like boring, mostly guitars were much too low level on the recordings, except, the band Silly, who was able to record in West Berlin, it wasn't all that good. There was not much incentive to make a deal with a recording company, Amiga. So to explain how ambivalent the situation was for musicians, let me tell you an example. Officially, you couldn't make copies of flyer or paper more than 30 copies. Were not allowed. You had to get a printing permit, actually. The same is true for cassettes. You couldn't make more than 30 copies of audio recording on cassette and sell them. And we actually did 200 or something, and nobody cared. At least in the late 80s, nobody cared about things that used to be forbidden or would have brought you to jail, say in the 1970s. So we were lucky. We had a much more relaxed period. And while other folks, even before 1983, were persecuted, we had it good, actually. There was not really some kind of artistic or political persecution that I can remember.
No. I think it also just fit the situation. It's very hard to see it from far away from now, 40 years later, but the situation, you had the various different sort of levels of bands. That wasn't level of quality necessary, but level of how they were situated in Pudis, Karat, City, kind of, the triplet of higher up accepted more, I wouldn't call them state bands, but they were more accepted by the government, let's say. And then you had the very smaller bands, and then you had us, which were like sort of underground bands where nobody really knew too much. Like when you said, 30 copies of a cassette, nobody would have known how many copies we made. How can they count that? Maybe if we do millions, yeah, they would have noticed. But with 200 or 500, nobody would have noticed it anyway. So it was a certain freedom that we had. And to come back to what you said, the contamination, I don't think anybody was contaminated. That's total nonsense. By talking to authorities, by testing things out, whether it was Amiga, the record label, or the radio, or anybody. And even, later on, me, when I was doing my solo stuff and I was getting my passport to be able to go to the West, I had to interface and talk to all these agencies, the official agents of the state, so to speak. I had to, deal with them, and they had to kind of okay whatever I was doing, and they all did. They all were kind of very supportive, I have to say, especially in the end, It was that's our thing. We were the last 5 years of the existence of the country, basically. Maybe in 85, nobody knew that, but in 88, 89, I think that was more clear. And people were acting differently, and they were becoming more adventurous, and they took risks. And I think that was great. That it was a really cool time when we did all this stuff in the history. Historically speaking, we were doing it in a great time.
Yeah, we were lucky in terms of, our generation, the historical situation. There's another point I want to make. I mean, they were the only authorities we could deal with. There were no others. I couldn't go to another country and say, oh, I like your authorities much better than ours. We had to deal with it. Fortunately, folks were kind of opening up and were supportive, as you said. And I had the impression we make progress. And they're welcoming. I remember one episode when we had our first performance in the Palast der Republik, which was very important house, to so to speak, das Haus des Volkes. That was the seat of the parliament and also of entertainment complexes and stuff. And I remember the promoter telling us, well, I know you have that song Freitagabend in Berlin. Well, you can't perform the lyrics here in the place, just don't play it. And we kind of nodded and yeah, in agreement. And then when we were on stage, like 1, 2, 3, bam, 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 Freitagabend, of course we played that. We didn't care. Actually, he was kind of, oh, I will lose my job and stuff, but he didn't. And nothing happened in 1988.
Well, of course not. Speaking of music, shall we play a song?
Yeah, what about Freitagabend in Berlin?
Yeah, we can play that, of course. We have that new refreshed version. I'll play that.
Well, to sum it all up, I'd say dependent on the location where you lived in East Germany, it could be quite easy to talk to authorities and get along with TV, radio, and recording company. But I can say that in some parts in the GDR, like let's say in Cottbus or in Leipzig or in Erfurt, they had different rules. It was much harder for them. But as far as I can remember, Berlin, except certain areas like the borough of Weißensee, Berlin was quite liberal, and it was mostly hassle-free to talk to government facilities, authorities, and functionaries of the Socialist Unity Party.
The borough of Weißensee, that's where I'm from. What do you mean? What was there?
Well, they had the Oberleutnant Brunner from VPKA Weißensee, which was the local police precinct, and they had a department of Erlaubniswesen, the permission department.
Wow, I'm not aware of that at all.
And she was kind of, I don't know, Stalinist, down to the core Stalinist. And I remember a concert, I think that was a concert you saw us in Langkantstraße before.
Yeah.
She gathered us and the other bands in the office of the promoter and said, well, if you say something tonight on stage detrimental to the interests of the German Democratic Republic, you won't go at home. You won't go home tonight. Really?
Wow.
I thought it was kind of funny, but I know that some bands had restrictions to perform in Weißensee. So there certainly were issues like that, but I consider it's like I considered it ridiculous, actually.
Yeah, and you just played the normal show anyway. Not that you would have planned to say anything anyway.
Sure.
You played the songs and that was it.
I forgot her. I forgot her almost already on my way to the stage.
Yeah, good.
So, but she was fired up. She probably thought she'd seen the devils or whatever, like the enemies of the state. But to me, it seemed all ridiculous.
Let's say goodbye until next week. I'll play another song. How about that? How about Stepchild? What do you think?
Oh, that's very good. I think I will do some gymnastics because this is such an inspiring music.
Good. Okay, that's it.
Okay, bye-bye.